Welcome, everyone. I think it's probably time for us to make a start. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the latest live webinar event, The Pathway to Recovery, the role of the IMF in establishing growth post the COVID-19 pandemic. Delighted that you could join us for the next in the series of our Alumni and Friends webinars. We hope you've been enjoying the series. These have focused on Warwick's response to the pandemic, our impact on global travel, sustainability, entrepreneurship, and now looking at the role of the IMF in supporting global economic recovery following the pandemic. My name's Chris Enu. I'm Provost at the University of Warwick. It's my pleasure to be your host today. We have at Warwick an alumni community that's now over 250,000 worldwide. That's an incredible community to work with, a community that we can share experience and who can participate in events such as this. And I'm particularly grateful for two of our noted alumni for joining us today and giving their time to share their knowledge, their experience and their thoughts. So first, I'm delighted to be joined by Warwick alumnus, Dr. Mahmood Mohyuddin, Executive Director, IMF. Mahmood studied a diploma in development economics, 1988 to 89, as well as a PhD in economics between 1990 and 1995. Accompanying him is Kevin Wall, retired CEO from Barclays Europe, who graduated from Warwick in 1981 with a BSc in accounting and financial analysis. Mahmood represents Egypt and the Arab countries on the IMF's board of directors with a focus on supporting those countries in achieving their economic and development goals through financial and monetary policies. Kevin retired last year after 40 years with Barclays Bank. His career took him to the US, to Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Ireland, as well as a range of roles in the UK. His final role was as CEO at Barclays Europe and a member of the Executive Committee of Barclays PLC. He now retains a number of independent and advisory roles, including those relating to a social impact enterprise that assists UK students from low impact backgrounds. Kevin, Mahmood, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. We've got a slightly different format for this webinar. In particular, Kevin is going to lead a conversation with Mahmood using many of the questions submitted by you and the wider alumni community in advance of today's events. Thank you for your submissions. There'll also be a little bit of time after the conversation between Kevin and Mahmood for me to put some of the latest questions to both of them. And I encourage you to use the chat function or the Q&A function to raise issues that you'd like me to ask those panelists. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Kevin and Mahmood. Thank you very much, both.
Thank you, Chris. I hope people can hear and see me. And Mahmood, can you just say something just to make sure that you're with us as well before I kick off?
Well, thank you, Kevin. Can you hear me well?
I can. Great. Thank you. Mahmood, nice to meet you again. We met virtually a few weeks ago. Mahmood, let's kick off with your links with Warwick. What prompted you to study at Warwick initially, and what prompted you to actually follow a career in development finance?
Well, it all started with a coincidence, and in the world without an internet, I was wandering in one of the corridors of one of the colleges of Cairo University, the Faculty of Economics and Political Science, and hanging on the wall was a small poster announcing a new program called QDE, Quantitative Development Economics, inviting applicants to submit their interest for a diploma. At the time we had generous support from different foundations, including Ford Foundation. So I thought, well, let me try and just apply. And I got in the process, and I found that many people at the time were of great knowledge of Warwick professors, including an uncle of mine who studied at LSE, friends of Professors Graham Pyatt, Jeff Round, and others. And when I joined Warwick, as you can see from my CV, I joined Warwick twice. One time for the diploma, and then I went to York to get my master's in economic policy in the following year. And then falling in love with Warwick, please, I I returned back again to Warwick to study my PhD in financial development and economic growth under the supervision of Anna Rowe. Warwick at the time, as it is today, it was one of the best universities. I remember very well the chair of the department saying, "You are welcome to one of the best 4 universities in the UK." And when you say best 4, this doesn't mean that you are number 1, number 2, or even number 3, but we are getting there. So yeah, and then I spent good 4 years in Coventry and Leamington Spa, enjoyed the neighborhood, had many friends, and established. I was checking just yesterday the economics society. That was one of the first societies that was established in the UK. I think second to the one established at LSE, with a good friend of mine now, Peter Wright, who's a professor at Sheffield University, under the supervision of Marcus Miller. And guess what? From this society, we have the very famous Warwick Economics Summit. This one of the offsprings of this society that is very much active. And I spoke at it 3 or 4 years ago.
And you know, we've probably got a number of people on the session today who perhaps have aspirations to follow in your footsteps and you know, pursue a career in development finance. What advice to them in terms of, you know, when you look back on your career to date, what characteristics do you need, I suppose, academically and personally, to be a success in the field that you've pursued?
In terms of academic achievement, today the international organizations, all of the UN system, the IMF, the World Bank, the regional development banks, all of them require master's degrees. So master's is the new BA or the new BSc. So that is an essential requirement. In the past, they used to accept people with experience. After you get your BA or BSc, if you have 4 or 5 years of experience, you can be admitted to these institutions. But now they insist on a master's degree, given the competition. Then in terms of training, it depends really on the areas of expertise. We have many people at the IMF from Warwick University, strength in macroeconomic analysis, financial analysis, mathematics, econometrics are very much required. But if you are going more to a development finance institution like the World Bank or the UNDP, your knowledge of development and finances is key. And having a broader perspective to matters. So if you have studied, or better than studying, perhaps acquiring knowledge through traveling, through reading on history, on development, to have a broad perspective of matters. So it's a mix of 2 things. You need to have the broader perspective to give you the ability to understand plans and strategies, but you need really to have the tools and skills that could really get you into this new world of database kind of solutions to be easier for you to access information and data and provide the solutions required. Warwick is a great place for that.
And I mean, I won't say you're completely unique, but you must be a relatively rare breed that's worked for the UN, for the IMF and the World Bank, I think I'm right in saying. Is what you've just said, that would apply to all 3? There's no real sort of distinction in terms of skills, academic or otherwise? Is that fair to say?
No, the IMF would require more specialized breed and caliber of economists and financial analysts. And now they are getting into new areas like digitalization, sustainability, or the Sustainable Development Goals, in addition to the areas of strength of the IMF, which are basically fiscal affairs, banking, monetary policy, and balance of payments. So we need really to have these kind of top knowledge in these areas of work. If you are joining the World Bank, you would need some of that, perhaps, but development and finance could really be of great use while you are at the bank. At the UN, people with background in development, history, economics, and of course, the UN has everything under the sun in areas of specialization. But I'm talking about the core field of operations.
So sticking with the IMF and really turning to the title of the event tonight, Mahmoud. The IMF's role clearly is critical. It's pivotal in terms of the globe dealing with the aftermath of COVID and the pandemic. Give us a sense as an insider as to, how does it arrive at a policy decision? And then I suppose most importantly, how does it actually affect practically, change? How does it impact how the world is going to deal with the aftermath of the pandemic?
Very good. In normal times, normal days, in a time of no crisis, which is not the time that we're living through these days, the IMF normally engages with the membership, which is 190 countries, member states, shareholders, owner of the institution. So it's an intergovernmental body through 4 ways of engagement: finance, surveillance, technical assistance, and knowledge sharing. So all countries, low income, high income, middle income, they have annual engagement with the fund in what's known as Article 4, which is reviews. These are basically detailed scrutiny of economic developments, financial, fiscal, and monetary affairs of any country that needs really to be done through missions, visiting the country, and providing assessment and sharing that with the rest of the membership. Then if the country in question is in need for finance because of a shock to the balance of payments or any issues of big concern, it's fiscal balances or any problem to do with the financial system, the 3-4 areas of expertise here, you will need an assistance, financial assistance from the fund. Normally, countries come in fear of debt problems or after having a debt crisis. Better to come to prevent a problem rather than dealing with it, as the common sense would tell you. And then another area of work is the technical assistance, capacity building in different areas, again, of the mandate of the fund. You will get technical assistance for central banking. Everybody today, for instance, talk about digitalization, central bank digital currencies. It was on the front page or the cover page of The Economist this week. So get a lot of technical assistance on how to establish systems dealing with digital opportunities and digital challenges, their impact on the monetary policy, on the budget, on how you collect taxes, on governance. In addition to more traditional kind of engagements on tax reforms, fiscal reforms, and monetary policy conduct. But in addition to these areas of work, which I can consider as really conventional, in times of crisis, everybody's talking about building back better or building forward better. So this is basically about 2 things: how to be smarter and greener. So the IMF in its own mandate, you will find lots of work now on digital solutions and on sustainability, climate change. And the UK is hosting COP26 in Glasgow later this year, and it's on top of the agenda, including the G7 meetings. So you will find lots of good ideas and good initiatives and good teams working in these 2 big items now, digital transformation and sustainability.
Are there any sort of particular, I suppose, more micro topics you might say that you've been particularly pleased or proud that the IMF has been on top of, sort of recently in terms of dealing with the pandemic, and any areas that you want to see, I suppose, further focus on going forwards?
Well, since the crisis, and back in March and April 2020, the fund did many good and fast things to react to the crisis and the and what's so-called the emergency financing, a variety of rapid credit facilities, rapid financing instrument, and you can really see the repetition of rapid. This means that financial packages without conditions shared with countries based on their demand. And we have 81 of such facilities or 81 beneficiaries of countries of such facilities. The second is grants for debt relief, and the beneficiaries of that through a catastrophe trust fund, were around 29 countries benefiting from such relief. I'm using here some references because there are many numbers. The third area of work during the crisis were many calls for bilateral debt relief, including the implementation of the G20 recommendations for the debt service suspension initiative. And that you have 73 countries benefiting from that initiative. And then there were, which is basically now something that we're all working on the fund. You may have seen the announcement, the issuance of new special drawing rights, which is basically the currency, quote unquote, of the IMF. $650 billion are going to be issued. Each country will be getting something like 95% of its quota. So it's a very decent amount of money to be added to your reserves. A country like the UK will not need that. So, but this will be giving it more additional liquidity that could really help the UK in its international cooperation through donating part of these SDRs or lending their SDRs. In addition to that, there had been enormous work for policy advice. This is the fifth area of work that I'm very proud of. In many countries, they may not need the money, but they need proper knowledge and proper advice on how to get things done. In addition to that, there were many missions for capacity development. Many of them had to happen virtually. And last is basically that area that I mentioned to you earlier about shifting the focus more towards greener and more digitalized solutions.
And your own portfolio is a sort of microcosm, really, of I suppose the global picture. You've got some, some extremely wealthy and advanced nations in your portfolio in the Middle East, and you've got some nations who are much more challenged in terms of economic and development. I mean, just how will that all get managed, both at your portfolio level, Mahmoud, and also globally? How do we? You sort of touched on leveling up earlier, and how's that going to play out?
You are very much right. It's a very diversified group, and despite the fact that 10 of these countries are in the same geographic location in the Middle East and Africa, and there is an 11th country, the Maldives, a small island, but it's very much covering all levels of development. I have low-income countries, middle-income countries, high-income countries, countries that are suffering from post-conflict problems like Yemen, countries suffering from fragility like Lebanon, and countries aiming for Mars and a kind of a shot towards Mars, borrowing that from the moon shots of the 1960s. Now there are Mars shots, longer shots perhaps. So this kind of variety of income, stage of development is basically making my my office super busy, because many countries are under program, and but all countries without exception are demanding technical assistance and knowledge from the fund. So for those who are not borrowing, like the Gulf countries, for instance, are more demanding when it comes to technical assistance and knowledge sharing. Others are taking mix of both. That gets me into two areas of focus now. If while I'm very proud and happy with the great progress that the IMF has been witnessing, and the managing director of the IMF keeps saying it is not your father's IMF, meaning that it changed, it modernized, it evolved. What I like to see is more attention to be given to the middle income countries. And the other thing that I like to see is more work on the sustainable development goals, not just climate change. At the end of the day, climate change is very important, very critical. And without proper attention to it, we'll all suffer. But in addition to that, you need really to put that within the proper framework, which is sustainable development goals, or the 2030 development agenda, which caters for more than climate change. And there is biodiversity, there is issues related to environment, there are matters related to poverty, gender, human capital, including education and health. So we need to put that all within the framework, in addition, of course, to governance and rule of law. So this is one big area of work. The other thing is basically that we need to pay attention to the middle income countries. You may have heard the concept of trapped in the middle or the missing middle. So we have that in a new fashion. Low income countries get many initiatives to support them, which is great. And we need more of them, like the initiative that I just mentioned of the G20 and the DSSI. And the advanced economies can borrow today, and the markets have access to markets close to zero, anywhere in the banking industry, and you know more than me in this area on having free lunch. But those on the middle, they don't really have the concessional financial means, but at the same time, they do not really have adequate access to markets. If they borrow today, they will borrow with huge additional costs, high premium, and high spreads. So middle income countries need really to be put in the attention, because they are host of more than 65% of the poor today.
And if you had to sort of pick on a relatively small number of industries or sectors that will, you know, help drive us forwards and out of what we've experienced over the last 12 months, what would they be? I'm sure some of them are, you know, obvious ones, but you know, just two or three to help guide us in terms of, you know, where you see that, I suppose, you know, assistance and drive and impetus coming from, as I say, by industry or by sector globally.
The first one, which is multi-sectoral by nature, is infrastructure. And you can really see the building back better, the what's so-called the New Deals. You go to Korea, Japan, Europe, the UK, and the US, there are lots of initiatives with great fiscal support from government through stimulus, trillions of dollars being spent around the world, especially in the advanced economies. So infrastructure, but I would really say it's not just the traditional infrastructures of roads and networks, airports and seaports, but the digital infrastructure, which requires huge investments in building it and in securing it. And this is a very big area as well to push the other sectors forward. The other area of work is the investments required in human capital. This is basically education and health. And you see in many of the stimulus packages, including the one that we see here in the US, lots of investments in education, childcare, and healthcare. And the third area of investments, which is huge and is going to be discussed definitely at length in Glasgow with its partnership, is the investment in resilience. Climate change is a threat, but there are many opportunities to mitigate it and adapt to its challenges as well. And here you have huge investments, again, in areas like renewable energy or in adaptation in agriculture. So there are a variety of investment sectors, but what you need then, given the case of uncertainty that we are suffering from, and I remember when I was at Warwick, it was very famous lectures on decision making under uncertainty, and now we need lots of more than the academic work, the guts to, as a banker, you have to do many decisions, but mainly under risk. But now under uncertainty is basically like shooting in the dark. It needs guts, and it needs really the public investments behind the private investment to encourage it, but not to crowd it out, to encourage
it. Which leads me into probably I'll ask a question and then I'll hand it back to Chris and see what questions we've had coming in from the audience now. But are you, are you optimistic? I mean, clearly lots of challenges, lots of wood to be chopped, as our American friends like to say. But are you, there you are sitting in a critical institution. You have a critical role, not just in terms of your own Middle Eastern portfolio, but more broadly being in the IMF. Notwithstanding the challenges ahead, are you reasonably upbeat? This is a very important answer for all of us on this seminar.
I think with the great solutions coming from science and scientists of the developments of the vaccine, everybody started to be optimistic back in December 2020. But what we see that many countries have been very successful, like the UK in rolling out the vaccine, and the US here, they are doing a remarkable job. But many countries, they don't have even 1% of their population vaccinated. This is going to be a very big challenge, not just for the countries that are not really subject to rolling a good and effective policy for rolling out the vaccine, but those who have it as well. My friends at the WHO would always remind us that nobody's safe until everyone is. So here, this is a very big challenge. So the opportunity is there, the optimism is there, but the pessimism as well should be there in order to encourage us to fix matters. Those who are projecting growth models and recovery have exhausted the alphabet by different letters, from V curve, which I can see happening now in the US, 6% and more of growth, or China, more than 8%, in Europe, 4 to 5%. But emerging markets could be more of a U curve when you are less than 4%. Some countries in the South, low-income countries, could be an L-shaped curve. And worse of them all, when you have this kind of a zigzag that you have instability. I'm afraid that the world, if you get all of these letters combined, we could be up to a K-shaped letter. When you see more inequality, more people, more countries rising, and more, or actually more than them, are suffering from major decline. So it's basically about how to enhance international cooperation. That's why I like this work in multilateralism, in providing not just national-based or local-based solutions, which are critical for any kind of success, but basically enhancing international cooperation and coordination to not just on finance, but in knowledge and technical assistance to help countries dealing with the crisis.
Well, thank you. As I say, I'm going to turn it back to Chris now to see what questions we've got coming in. But can I just compliment you on the clarity and directness of your responses, which I'm sure you'd be the first to agree is not always the case when one asks questions of people with academic backgrounds and people working in big multilateral institutions. Just very, very clear answers, very direct. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I enjoyed our discussion. Thank you.
Chris, back to you.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks, Mahmoud. A very, very wide-ranging discussion and some fascinating issues discussed between the two of you. What I'd like to do now is broaden out and perhaps pick up some of the questions that have been starting to appear from our audience and get your views on these. And let me begin, and I will apologise in advance. This is a very selfish question, but this is a question that interests me hugely, and it clearly interests our audience because I think it's got 3 thumbs up in the Q&A. And it's really asking about how businesses and universities should work together to create a platform for economic growth and recovery post-pandemic. And I think we'd all be very much interested to hear views from yourself, Mahmoud, and also from Kevin on this one.
Kevin, would you like to start?
Yes, I mean, my initial and obvious response, Chris, which isn't particularly helpful, is that there needs to be a lot more of it. But that's probably something that's been the case for a long time. I mean, there are some great examples of where business, industry, and academia in the UK, which I'm most familiar with, work very closely together. I mean, Warwick is clearly an and has been for decades a leader in that respect, particularly in terms of some of the industries in the West Midlands. But I clearly, having spent all of my career sort of on the private sector side of things, I'm a passionate believer in that partnership. I've seen it work extremely well in banking. We haven't got the time now for me to give you all the examples I've seen where it has worked well, whether it's sort of product development and inverted commas. I don't mean that in a banking sense, but just in terms of academic developments leading to product developments in industry and business, whether it's partnerships around actually courses. I mean, let's face it, a few decades ago, there weren't business schools in the UK. And to the extent that there were, they were very academic and not particularly practical. That's changed considerably. So look, I could go on, but there's been some great examples of where that partnership works well. But I think, put COVID to one side, there needs to be more. And I think what the UK is going through at the moment in terms of its challenges, again, putting COVID to one side, that partnership just continues to need to be strengthened.
Thanks, Kevin. Mahmood, I mean, you were talking earlier about collaboration and cooperation. So I guess you'll have firm views on this matter. Yeah,
well, with my reference to be the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17th goal of the SDGs is basically about partnerships, and partnership between government, private sector. You include the local communities, and we have seen how local communities have been really the missing pillar in the past, but now because of COVID, great solutions are coming from that dimension. I cannot agree more with Kevin in the importance of the business sector, and Warwick is a great example, as he mentioned. I was at the time when the late Professor Lord Bhattacharya had his marvelous work at the engineering school with many in the manufacturing departments, with great links with business in the Midlands and beyond. Warwick Business School, it was not just good for people like me who had the benefits of being a host of some of the hospitality activities and assisting the visitors to Warwick, but basically the quality and the of the graduates here, when you have this kind of knowledge, it's not just the finance, the partnership that has some sort of better understanding on how markets work, how governments work. And there are other partnerships that Economics Department, for instance, had with the Bank of England and with the UK Treasury. This provides great career opportunities as well, in addition to providing sources of finance, which are very much required and needed for a top university like Warwick, but gives great opportunities for the graduates by the university to be a familiar name with many employers, be them from government or business sector or from the NGOs, and we see their impact today.
Thank you both. I think that's it's reassuring to hear that, because I know we believe that we have an important role to play in helping that process that you described earlier of building back better. So can I stick with this theme of recovery and perhaps pick on maybe a slightly more technical question, but again one that's attracted quite a bit of interest in our amongst our online audience, and it's the question really of central banks releasing large amounts of cash into the economic systems of quantitative easing, and a worry, to what extent do you think that this artificial pumping of cash into the economy will create the next financial bubble, and will it lead to consequences much more serious than that we observed in 2008? And again, with both of your histories, I'm sure you'll both have clear views on this issue, but it's obviously one that's occupying a lot of people's attention.
I'll let Mahmood go first on this one.
Right. Right. Well, I'll share my personal view. The institutional view of the IMF is shared on its website in Snow by the projections that our very able chief economist is doing, and she published lots of blogs about that. I encourage the audience to follow that Yale debate between two important professors, Larry Summers and Paul Krugman. And Paul Krugman is, of course, the famous Nobel laureate, and Larry Summers was many things, including professor at Harvard and ex-Treasury Secretary. And you can really see the division of ideas and the disagreement here. That where Paul Krugman say that stimulus packages are basically the right thing, they are about enough, and they shouldn't really be inflationary because they are really covering the output gap. Larry Summers disagrees with that, and he says, well, the output gap is that much, and we are spending more than what's needed. So the obvious will happen here. I think there is another issue here that we need to emphasize, but not just about fundamentals that make inflation happen. It's not the cost push or the demand pull that we all learned at Warwick, but basically the expectations. If you are expecting something to happen in a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing, it may happen at the end. And the markets will price assets and goods and services accordingly. What I see here that the Fed is making a distinction between two things. If the price increase is going to be temporary or transitory, they are not going to be making any major action from their side by changing the interest rates. But if it is going to be persistent and they have a target, not for inflation not to exceed 2%, so they will act. The implications of actions by the Fed, given that the dollar is still the lingua franca, and we see the reserves of the world, more than 60% are still denominated in dollars, and many countries are pegging their currency to the dollar. That will have many important implications on exchange rate markets, on capital flows. So it's not just limited to the problem. The problem is there, but the solution needs really to put some sort of considerations of what you do in the US that may impact the sterling and may impact the euro and may impact the emerging markets currencies at the same time.
I mean, my view, Chris, is that we should all be very thankful that the central banks have done what they've done. You know, there will be consequences, and clearly Mohamed's just talked through some of the sort of views that exist as to what those consequences might be. And no doubt there are you know, things that will happen that no one's quite anticipating at the moment. But I just think that given what's happened, the response that we've seen from central banks and you know, from governments in terms of some of the things they've done on the fiscal side, as I say, I just think we should be grateful that they've done what they've done, and if subsequently, you know, a bit more inflation is the price to pay, then sort of speaking as a layman, that's something I'm prepared to live with in terms of the support that they've given over the last 12 months.
Thanks both. It's always nice to hear some grounds for optimism, even if it is cautious and considered optimism. So keeping on a similar sort of theme, I guess, and Mahmoud, I know you touched on this in your chat with Kevin, but it's come up with a number of members of the audience, and it's really about the tension between economic growth, recovery from the pandemic, and addressing our climate and sustainability goals. How do we get that balance right? Recovery and climate, but actually recovery and the broader SDGs. And if I can be cheeky, perhaps I might ask Kevin first, because I know you touched on it, Mahmoud, but I would like to come back to you and pick up further, because it's obviously attracting a lot of interest. But Kevin, do you have any thoughts on how we balance out this tension?
Well, I think I recognise there is tension, and again, putting it somewhat simplistically, we had a long time where climate was really a bit of a minority issue, i.e. a minority of people felt strongly about it and worried about its impact. And I'm not talking here about people who sort of a climate sort of naysayers or not. I just mean that it wasn't something that really featured heavily in many people's businesses, governments' agendas until relatively recently. And now that it does, that sort of tension is, I suppose, manifesting itself more, whether it's shareholder activism, whether it's governments trying to sort of get on top of the agenda now, and Mahmoud obviously referred to the Glasgow sort of summit later this year. I'm actually optimistic. I mean, I in one of my other roles, I see a lot of the extraordinary initiatives that are going on, and this is again where academia meets sort of the business world in terms of the technology that's coming to the forefront now. Whether it's alternative fuel sources. I mean, I was sitting on something the other day. We're looking at an investment, and this is a company making aviation fuel from land waste. I mean, it's just extra, and commercially, I mean, it's viable. It's possible. I mean, maybe you all know that. I didn't. So I just use that as an example. So there's a tension, but I think there's so much brain power and indeed money and focus now on I suppose moving on from the tension that exists. It's not going to happen overnight, but I just think there's a lot of positive things going on in this space. Yes, there are still some worrying things in terms of the impact that we're having on the climate and on the planet, but it's at the forefront of everyone's agenda now. My big concern, and I'd be interested to hear Mohammed's views on this, is that I think some people are sort of paying it lip service, whether it's in the commercial space or the government space. It's a sort of very hot topic. There are people who are genuinely doing things about it and genuinely investing and applying their brains, and there are others who speak about it a lot and don't really follow through.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you. Well, this is quite a tour, Kevin. Thank you so much of answers to this important question. I think because of what Kevin mentioned about technology, research and development, and good scientific solutions, the tension is not really as bad as it used to be. Today, if you are in energy sector, you'll be seeing that the cost of renewable energy sources like solar or wind today are a fraction of what they used to be 20 years ago. And there are figures floating around about the cost effectiveness of these solutions. So while the advocates have been really telling us, don't think of environment and climate as an afterthought, don't really push growth and then think of the environment and cleaning up later, that was basically a strategy that failed because the cost of that is huge. So I think Christine Lagarde has a very nice way with the president of the European Central Bank, has a very good way in summarizing it. And they are all about 3 N's. The first N is basically about inclusion, or include. To include making all of the externalities, everything that we were learning in academia about the negative externalities need to be factored into the price. If you are really responsible for pollution or waste, that needs really to be put in the price. And there is huge work today in the natural capital accounting and dealing with nature as an asset, not just the financial asset that we know how to manage, but basically how to bring nature as an asset and how to include it in the formula. The second N is basically about inform, which is the area that Kevin touched on, when basically in the absence of a metric, with absence of yardstick, and universities are known for accuracy of grading, ranking is important, grading is important. But today I'm afraid to say that anybody can say anything because you don't really have this kind of reference. It's improving. The issues related to mandatory disclosure, which is the former Bank of England governor is championing today, that you need really to disclose what you do based on criteria and measures is very much important. It's not just an inform in a colorful publication and that's it. You need to inform based on regulatory standards, as we inform our shareholders or our depositors of our capital adequacy or the soundness of our system. The third one is about the in the invest. That in the whole thing is basically, as I was trying to say before with Kevin, that there are huge opportunities for investment in this area. So include, inform, and invest, and just with these kind of dynamics that we're seeing between government, private sector, and the community, matters can really be improved. But I have to say something, because matters are not that easy. It's not just to say, well, the society at large could be a winner, but there will be losers. And we need really to manage the transition properly through compensation, through safety nets, through restructuring, through more opportunities. But we cannot say, well, the society net is going to be positively winning, so everybody should be sacrificing for that. Those who are going to be touched on negatively or having their fortunes or their profits slashed because of that, need really to be having some sort of attention to them in policies and incentives and managing the transition, which is called the just transition.
Thank you. Thanks both indeed. I mean, I think really important points there. And as I said, always good to have some grounds for optimism. I wonder if I could change tack and perhaps ask both of you if you would be willing to share, you know, advice, experiences for the many in our audience. And a couple of people have come up with a question really about the ability to transfer into the finance sector. You know, we sometimes concern ourselves that we force young people into career choices too soon, and we push them in particular directions. And several have asked, you know, to what extent is it possible to transfer into the financial sector following perhaps an initial and successful career in areas such as engineering or technology? And if you are going to do that, and if it is possible, what's the right sort of route? Is it about doing an MBA, or is it about convincing a prospective employer that you have the skills that they're looking for? Is it a mix of both?
Well, I could probably talk for the rest of the evening on this topic because it's one I give a lot of thought to. And look, there's no question that I think most people's career paths or the sort of the programs by which people follow careers or develop careers have narrowed considerably. I mean, you know, when I went into banking 40 years ago, my graduate training program was 5 years in length. And I think nowadays they're about 6 months in length. And you had to go overseas, you had to work in risk, you had to work with clients, you had to work in a head office function like human resources. You got a much, you know, broader career. And that's just no longer the case. And people have to make choices, as you've implied, Chris, in your question, whether they're going to go into engineering or finance or medicine or whatever it may be. And then, of course, once you've done that, trying to find a way to move, if that's what you want to do, is a lot more challenging. But it can be done, to answer your question. An MBA is one route. I feel very strongly that people shouldn't do MBAs until they've actually had some practical experience. I think, you know, if you want to do an MBA, you know, get a few years under your belt doing something, whatever it may be. You'll take a lot more into an MBA and you'll get a hell of a lot more out of it. And also your CV is stronger in terms of making that shift. But, you know, just to choose your example, if you're in engineering and you want to try and get into finance, there are courses you can do that requires time commitment from you. There are, you know, qualifications you can pursue. You could try and get within your engineering company into the finance function, and then maybe move from the finance function in an engineering company into finance sort of in a purer sense. So that there are routes, but take advice from people who've done it. There are lots of people out there. They may be Warwick graduates, they may not be. You know, just engage with people who've taken that track. Engage with people who've done an MBA and switched careers as a result. it's not a question of just waking up one morning and saying, I want to switch from being an engineer to an investment banker, but you can find routes through. And in finance, in banking, just to pick on my own career, we have, if you take investment banking, you've got healthcare bankers, you've got engineering bankers, you've got new tech bankers, and many of them did actually have careers in those industry sectors before they ended up in finance.
Thanks, Kevin. I mean, Mahmood, you work in a role that is much more perhaps a specialist economist's role. Are the opportunities for moving into international agencies the same?
Right. Well, I like very much what Kevin mentioned, and he indeed seemed that he gave it lots of thoughts. I'll let me share with you what I failed to convince my daughter with, because I was always trying to encourage her to get into economics and finance, and she ended up to be in engineering. I'm mechanical and electric engineer. But for 15 years, when I was teaching back home at Cairo University, money, banking, and financial markets, my first lecture was starting with a question: does finance matter? And then I would go on for 90 minutes explaining why it matters in a debate. It's basically, regardless your discipline, medicine, engineering, any area of specialization, some basic knowledge of finance helps. And then career shifts in today's world, with adequate degrees or adequate qualifying subject that you need to get, because sometimes it may not be necessarily with a degree these days. And I agree very much with what Kevin mentioned about an MBA. Should be a middle career or after 10 years kind of experience or less, but not less than that. If you happen to have the time and the investments and your skills, and we are not with economics or finance background, better to have a master's in economics or finance rather than an MBA. Then I saw some of the top names in our fields in economics and finance who came from the disciplines like engineering, physics, mathematics. You check the biographies of many of the Nobel Prize winners in economics, you will see their career started as mathematicians or engineers. And then the issues related here on how to work and choices in a fast changing world. So finance is not really the kind of finance that during my day when I was at Warwick in 1990s trying to learn. Now you see some of the top names in Wall Street or in the city in London, you'll see them asking for data scientists, asking for people who can do coding, masters of artificial intelligence, people who know more about behavioral science and behavioral economics. So it is not just the main core areas of finance, be it principles of finance or accounting or the rest of the curriculum, but basically the related topics that in that kind of fast changing world. And you link it to something, as Kevin was mentioning, that you need really to have finance with a specialization in areas of work in sustainability. This is my favorite topic for like 10 years now. I see huge opportunities on finance for development, on providing solutions at the micro level, at sectoral level, at a national level, at a global level. So this is a huge area for those who are browsing the opportunities. Just put sustainability and finance and see how many opportunities are there for this new area of work.
Thanks both. Sadly, our time is going too quickly, but let me just close with one final question for you both. And it's really looking for a very quick response. One piece of advice would you give? What one piece of advice would you give to young people in terms of being prepared for the post-COVID economic environment?
Well, lots, but one thing, and particularly given how isolated many people have been, I think just engage with people. I mean, it sounds a fairly obvious thing to say, but given what we've gone through, I think a lot of people will struggle to re-engage with people. It's one of the lessons I learned from being at university. And of course, it becomes a very small world. People that you made the effort to engage with, that perhaps you at the time thought it was all a bit of a hassle, it pays off. So, just to the extent it doesn't come easy to people, and it doesn't come easy to everyone, just make sure you're engaging with people in the workplace, socially, on the internet, whatever. Just stay connected.
Thanks, Kevin. Mahmood, your words of wisdom.
Well, I wouldn't call it that way. But, well, I think I would agree again with Kevin. I'm trying to get advice and wisdom, and especially in times of uncertainty, is very much key. And you can do that. I know that Warwick has a kind of mentorship program, and this is crucial. I really indebted to many people at Warwick, at York, during my career developments, who gave me honest advice, not about which subject should I study, which is always fine, but basically about possible areas of work and possible career shifts, and to be very flexible and pragmatic about matters. We don't really have, in a fast changing world, we don't have the luxury of being rigid or dogmatic about matters. We need really to be as flexible and as pragmatic as it gets. And today's world is allowing us to serve the world, perhaps with less cost than what I have and Kevin to pay back in our time when we started our careers.
Thank you both. I mean, you've both concluded by talking about the importance of connections and advice, and we're incredibly grateful to you both for sharing your expertise, offering your advice, and being connected to our alumni community. It really is very much appreciated. We are just about out of time. I'm asked to give a very quick summary, and I think if I can just draw out some key points. The things that I've taken away from this are about the real importance attached to the Sustainable Development Goals, climate within that context, the need for brain power, and by implication, of course, the importance of education, but also the significance of partnership, of sharing and collaboration, of trying to find balanced routes forward that bring people together. And of the key role that international agencies play in all of this. There are lots of questions that we haven't been able to pick up on, ranging from infrastructure lending, decentralized financial platforms, cryptocurrencies, Lebanon, Argentina, the situation in Egypt and the economy. If only we had more time, we don't. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kevin, Mahmood. Thanks to our audience for being with us. The event's been recorded, so we will share with you by email. Our next webinar is going to focus on inclusivity in the workplace with our Director of Social Inclusion and alumni speakers. And can I just encourage you to keep watching out for your alumni newsletters for more information on our events and the opportunity to connect. And that's the key piece of advice, I think, if you take anything away from today: connection, openness, listening, partnership, balance, and learning from others. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you again, and at some point in person when we get that opportunity. Thank you very much, and goodbye, everyone.